How's it going, everybody? This is the Nitty Gritty. My name is Chad. With me is Leonard. We have a webcast / podcast that we do weekly about various wrestling topics. Please check us out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you want to listen to us instead of watch us, which I would understand. But either way, this week we are going to bring you another Rebook. So we decided we've done some older events. This is the newest event we've ever done, and the event is December to Dismember from 2006. It took
it's still like 15 years old,
right? yeah it is. It's I don't know how much newer. I guess we could probably get newer if we really wanted to.
I mean, we could do anything. I would just have to watch it.
This one is notorious for many reasons, but it took place December 3rd, 2006 at the James Brown Arena in Augusta, Georgia. And obviously it was meant to be primarily with stars from the ECW brand. And that really didn't happen totally. There were stars from both Raw and SmackDown who also worked the show. And this was, obviously, it was the second installment of the December to Dismember event. It was an ECW event in 1995. And let's get to the card before we get to some of the aftermath, because there's a lot of aftermath here.
Yeah.
But in a dark match, you had Stevie Richards defeating Rene Dupree, the Hardys defeating Eminem, Balls Mahoney defeating Matt Stryker, Elijah Burke and Sylvester Turkey defeating the FBI, Daivari defeating Tommy Dreamer, Ariel and Kevin Thorne defeating Kelly Kelly and Mike Knox. And in the main event, it was an extreme elimination chamber match for the ECW championship with Bobby Lashley defeating Big Show, Test, Rob Van Dam, Hardcore Holly, and CM Punk. Sabu was supposed to be in this event, but couldn't, and so was replaced with Hardcore Holly. So the extreme elimination chamber concept, every star received a weapon of choice in their pods with them. And so there you have the extreme concept. So let's just give our opinions here quickly before we get to some of the events that happened afterwards. This time in my life anyway, I had graduated college in 2005. I was still kind of looking to get a firm career under my belt and, move in with my wife who lived in a different state. So I had a lot going on. And the reason I mention all that is because I really wasn't watching a lot of the WWE product at this time. It wasn't interesting to me because I had a lot of really kind of important life things going on. I still did write for 411 Mania at the time, and that was fun. It was mainly, I was just doing movie stuff. So I was kind of loosely keeping up with the product, but I really wasn't watching it week to week. And but certainly I have watched this event since then, and it's not very good. It's not a very good use of the talent. It didn't really do the ECW brand any favors. The stars in the Elimination Chamber match were not really the type of people you would want promoting the ECW brand if you really wanted to get it popular, in my opinion. So yeah, there was a lot of creative differences, which we'll get to. But Leonard, did you watch this live or did you check it out later on like I did?
No, I was watching ECW weekly on TV at the time. But I think the most telling thing is, even though I know I was watching it, I couldn't remember anything about the rosters and the storylines.
Right.
So I think that speaks to what a mess it was, how boring it was.
Yeah.
And that it was a memorable mess, at that. Not just this pay-per-view, but everything that was going on. I know in a minute here we're going to get into what some of those things were, but this show itself, it's just a week after Survivor Series. There were only 2 matches announced prior, and this led to this show having one of the lowest buy rates and live attendance figures of any WWE pay-per-view ever. And those 2 announced matches were the Elimination Chamber main event and the opening tag match. And most people will tell you those were the two best matches on the card.
Right.
Everything else in the middle will be considered hot garbage.
Right.
And again, I know you want to go into the aftermath, but that would be my next thoughts, because I think a lot of what happened just within weeks of the show kind of speaks to how bad it was.
Right. And, one of the main things was less than 24 hours after this event took place, WWE announced that Vince McMahon had sent Paul Heyman home, citing slumping television ratings and a disgruntled talent roster that caused his dismissal. And, he was pulled from ECW's creative team, and McMahon kind of put the blame on how the pay-per-view was poorly received. But even though Heyman was still under contract, he was sent home. And the major difference, and this has been talked about, a lot on Something to Wrestle with Bruce Pritchard, that Paul Heyman wanted CM Punk to beat everybody with his finishing maneuver at the time, which is the Anaconda Vice. He wanted CM Punk to kind of run the table and win the entire event. And that didn't happen. Vince McMahon didn't like that idea. And, Pritchard has cited that if you really shout about something often enough, it works to your disadvantage in many ways. It doesn't get McMahon's attention in a positive way. It actually can backfire on you. And it did backfire on Heyman, and it backfired on Punk, who, would cite this situation in his famous pipe bomb promo years later. So yeah, that was the main thing. And, critics had a negative reaction to it. And, Wrestling Observer called it one of the worst major wrestling show of the year. And since then, it's been considered one of the worst pay-per-views that WWE has ever produced. So
it should also be mentioned that Stevie Richards and Tommy Dreamer both asked for their releases immediately following the show, and they were refused. And Big Show, who was the champion, he wound up taking a long sabbatical, to be gone more than a year right after this. And then right after the first of the year in early January, they wound up releasing several of the names that were working with ECW at the time. So, Heyman was really a scapegoat here. I mean, you said yourself, Heyman wanted to do this, Vince did that, but blamed Heyman anyway.
Right.
So he blamed Heyman for the stuff that he wanted to do. And more than Vince, this was around the time where Stephanie McMahon was really in charge of creative, and she wanted to write soap operas. She wanted soap opera storylines. And I think the idea was that they wanted to recreate the original ECW, and they were, moving away from the ruthless aggression era. They weren't to the PG era yet. They were getting there. And I think there was an idea of taking all the salacious stuff and shifting it to the ECW brand without them, particularly Stephanie, having any idea of what made the original ECW work and not work.
Right.
So, why I don't know if having Punk run the table and giving him a super push at this time would have been the smartest thing to do. I do believe it might have been better to let Heyman have more of the reins than they did. And before we get going here, I just want to say, in my rebooking, when I considered this show and I looked at things, I wanted to break out the talent from the Elimination Chamber and use them up and down the card more, because for this exercise we're doing, I think you get more value of doing that. I wanted to mix the old and new ECW talent, and I wanted to deliver a show that feels like a transition from the original ECW to the WWE version. Now, I know that we talked about, since they actually used other talent on the show, not just strictly ECW people, that we could use other WWE people. I tried to mainly use ECW people. I have one major exception to that, and one super mega cheat that we will get to.
Yeah, I did not do what you did. And
okay.
This is going to be fun. I had a lot of fun doing this. Initially, I was drawing a blank, and I was like, oh man, what do I do with this roster? There's so many people, and like, do I want to? I have a lot of thoughts, and we'll get into some of those thoughts. So we are going to start our rebook and run down the matches that we had here. And before we get into our main cards, Leonard, do you have any dark matches?
I do. I have one dark match, and it is Stevie Richards versus Tommy Dreamer. Two old school ECW guys. I would say just let them go out there and have a traditional ECW style match to kind of wake up the crowd and introduce things. Both of these guys could still work pretty well at this point, and we're still pretty good in the ring, even outside of the so-called, garbage wrestling ECW was known for. So this was just, to me, it's just saying, yes, we are ECW and kind of just getting the crowd going.
All right. Well, they probably faced each other a number of times, and I'm sure it would be entertaining to see it here. I had a dark match and a Sunday Night Heat / pre-pay-per-view preview match.
Oh, that's even better.
So yeah, because this roster was huge, so I used a lot. So my dark match, I had Shannon Moore versus Super Crazy. I figured, why not just have two high flyers in there doing their thing. And my Sunday Night Heat pay-per-view preview match would have been one of the matches from the original card, which is the Hardy Boyz versus Eminem.
Oh, okay.
If you're trying to sell pay-per-views, what better way than to feature this tag team match, which was well praised from the original event? If you want people to catch the attention of what you're doing, have guys in there that can really help you sell some pay-per-views to people that might be on the fence. So having said that, I will let you, Leonard, go over your first match.
Okay, first match, and I'm gonna guess you're gonna hate this. It is an elimination 4-way tag match for the ECW tag team titles, featuring the Basham brothers of Doug and Danny versus the FBI of Little Guido and Tony Mamaluke versus the Great Khali and Daveri versus the Knockout and Tap Out Connection, a name that never got over, of Elijah Burke and Sylvester Turkai, or as I like to call him, Sly Turkey. So if you want ECW to be considered legitimate as its own brand, I think you need to have tag team titles, which it never had. The original ECW did. These guys never had tag belts. So the Basham brothers, just to mention, were working as Paul Heyman's personal security force under masks. So they were there, but they weren't known. Take the masks off, let them be them. Let them just be introduced as the Bashams here. Everyone else is basically the tag teams that were available on ECW at the time. One thing I would definitely do would be to have a face-off between Turkai and Khali. And this might be surprising, and that's probably why you're going to hate this, but I would put the belts on Khali and Daveri, because that's the best way to promote and protect Khali, who is still very much at this time a spectacle, but was terrible in the ring and always was. So you let Daivari, who was a decent hand, do most of the heavy lifting in the tag matches, with Khali coming in and doing his clubbing stuff and wear down stuff. And I would immediately feud them with Burke and Turkai coming out of this. So I would have pretty much I would have the Bashams get eliminated, then the FBI, and then Burke and Turkai at the end, with Khali and Daivari going over. So given ECW itself was a small roster, I think what you would do is have a series of like maybe 4 to 6 week feuds with your tag champs and another team. And while that's going on, you're possibly building the next contenders by giving them some jobber squashes. So it's not a deep tag field, but I still feel that the brand would benefit from having tag belts.
Well, I mean, I like the match itself. Now the winners, yeah, I might pick different winners, but I guess in your head they kind of had a AJ Styles, Amos type
yes
chemistry going on, which is working for those two guys. But Daivari is not AJ Styles, and Great Khali is not Amos. But
no.
Anyway, now I do agree with you about the tag team titles, though. I think that they could have used that, had the brand flourished. But yeah. And you know what, though? I always thought the Bashams were underrated. I just think they needed a little bit of a style makeover, maybe, or like something to make them pop a little bit. Mm-hmm. I thought that they did okay. They just kind of never were given a little extra boost. And I don't mean push, just something to kind of get them out there more. But anyway, so before I get to my first match, this is a rebook, and hindsight is 2020. So let's look at it. The ECW brand under the WWE umbrella did not work. So if it didn't work, then was the December to Dismember idea a good one? I would say no. I think making a pay-per-view of just this brand when you have so many other pay-per-views going on. As Leonard mentioned, this is just after Survivor Series. There's another pay-per-view coming up really shortly after this one. There's a lot going on, and I think it may have been a little too much, but we have to have an event, right? So I would have changed the name. I would have changed the name of this event. Now, and they wouldn't have the Elimination Chamber be an event onto its own until 2010, but I can do what I want. So this would be the inaugural Elimination Chamber pay-per-view event. I would change it, and I would still feature ECW talent, but I would feature other talent as well. And as I hopefully intend to prove, I would get the brand out there in other ways where I'm not trying to throw in people's face, this is an ECW event, but we know it's not because it's under WWE ownership and it's not the same. So I would try to get the brand over in a more cerebral way. And so by doing that, I would change it and just have it be an Elimination Chamber event. So having said that, my first match would be William Regal versus Eugene. So the best I could tell, now obviously they were a tag team and they were really successful as a tag team, but the best I could tell, this match never took place. And if it did, it was maybe a one-off. I couldn't see that they had a feud. If I'm wrong, people out there can correct me. But the way I looked at it is that it didn't really happen because Eugene had been out, for some of his issues and, kind of in and out. So I would have that be a feud here. You could think of many different storylines. You could have, obviously the easier way would be Regal being the heel and, maybe saying something to the effect like his time with Eugene didn't help his career and they have a feud that way. And, maybe Eugene's sad because Regal turned his back on him, whatever you want to do. And if I were kicking off that feud here, I would have Regal go over, maybe with some interference by Dave Taylor, who he was aligned with at this time as well. So that is my opening match. And so, Leonard, what are your thoughts on my title change? Not, title being the name of the pay-per-view and my first match.
So you would never call it December to Dismember, or is the change happening at some point? You're originally.
I would if I were the owner, I'd be like, okay, we shouldn't make this strictly an ECW branded event. Let's have some ECW people on it, but let's change it to be an Elimination Chamber event, which highlights the chamber, not necessarily just the brand.
Well, in that way, then I think it works, because why would you be having a pay-per-view so soon after Survivor Series and, as you said, so shortly before your monthly December pay-per-view? Why do something special? Initially, we were doing something special because it's a ECW branded pay-per-view. So here you're still having something special. It's an Elimination Chamber branded pay-per-view. And of course, this is something they would start doing in 2010. So it's not outside of the realm of possibilities.
Right.
It's early, but
it's a little bit of time
already, which I've done, in my rebooks. So it might have something that was already on the table that they were thinking about. So yeah, as a concept, we're going to focus on the chamber. Then I think it's fine. Again, we're not going to have anything close to the same this time.
No, we're not. Initially, when I was thinking about this, I had wondered. I was like, well, maybe he'll keep this or keep that. But now that I know a little bit of what you're doing, I know we're not going to be anywhere on the same page, which I like. It should be more that way.
Yeah, again, my concept, your concept, totally different, and that's fine, because then we're going to see how things could have been different and how things could have been worked. As for the first match, I did a quick look when you were talking, and no, I didn't see anything pop up about Regal versus Eugene. This would be a whole separate show talking about the Eugene character and Nick Dinsmore. Right. I did not like the Eugene character, and I know it was supposedly Nick Dinsmore's idea, but it seemed like a character that cut him off the knees, because he was a good worker if you watched OVW stuff. So on paper, Regal versus Nick Dinsmore, I think, is a really, really good match, and even versus Eugene, I think it can still work, but at the same time, I could see them getting in more comedy spots.
Yeah.
Than maybe doing a straight serious match. So it's going to be more of an entertainment thing than a straight match. Well, that straight match would have been really good. So, and I would agree with putting Regal over, especially considering that Eugene flamed out as a character very quickly. So I would definitely go with Regal getting the win as a heel. So that's an interesting idea, and I like. And actually, I do something not the same booking, but the idea of, oh, this was a feud, or this was something that happened that didn't get a blow off, and then
Right.
let's blow it off. So I do have something like that coming up, but not this match. My next match is an ECW Legends kendo stick match, and it's not The Rock with a kendo stick.
Oh, well,
Yeah, but it's the Sandman versus Sabu. So you take two of your top ECW legends that you had under contract, and you throw them into a match with a gimmick. Sandman is known for using a kendo stick. Sabu's no stranger to one. Similar idea to my dark match. Just let these guys go out there and show what old school ECW was all about. And I would actually put the Sandman over here because, believe it or not, he seemed to be more popular at the time. He was working this gimmick where he would just run down to the ring and beat the crap out of weirdos like the ECW Zombie, and then getting out. So, and he actually has an appearance like this. I forget which match it is now, where he comes down and he does that. So I would put the Sandman over. And again, the idea of making this an ECW branded pay-per-view, doing a weapons match like this.
Hey, I would watch that all day. I think that would be a lot of fun. And it would have been interesting to see how the brand would have been different if they really, really tried to understand what made the original promotion popular, and maybe tried to work on that as opposed to trying to change the promotion to be more WWE centric. But yeah, that would be an entertaining match as well. So my number 2 match, and before I say it, one of the reasons I think this pay-per-view wasn't very good is because other than the ECW championship, there was no titles defended here.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to have something to look forward to in that regard. You need to have anything could happen type of thing going on. And in my pay-per-view, when you say anything could happen, that is, you need to take that literally. So my next match would be Brian Kendrick and Paul London versus Jamie Noble and Gregory Helms in a tornado tag team match with both the tag team titles and the cruiserweight title on the line. So that's something that you would see here and there in many promotions. You would see different both titles of something on the line. So I would have this be a tornado tag team match with all those titles on the line. For people who might not remember, Gregory Helms had a really long reign as the cruiserweight champ. He's very underrated. I like him a lot. And I think that this would have been a barn burner of a match. Brian Kendrick and Paul London were great. I always thought Jamie Noble and Gregory Helms were underrated. Were they a tag team? No, but this is my rebook. So I think that this would be a really fun match, and I would have Kendrick and London win this. And how I would have it end is I would have Noble be the one pinned. Helms takes the cruiserweight title, claims he didn't lose it because he wasn't pinned. Then, you have an automatic feud with either Kendrick or London and Helms, on the next show, feuding over the cruiserweight title. And maybe if it's London against Helms at the next event, you have Helms win it. So, he could argue he never really lost it. You could do a lot of different things with that, I think, but I would watch this match all day. That's why I put it here.
So technically, since London pinned Noble, would that make London the cruiserweight champion?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting concept. Yes.
Is there any? You have thoughts? That's all right. Go ahead.
Is there any build to this, or is it just you're just doing it?
Yeah, at this point, I have storylines with some of my other matches. In this case, we're just doing it. Now, okay. Brian Kendrick and Paul London would defend the tag team titles at one of the subsequent pay-per-views. It was like a 4-way, I think. I know Eminem was involved and other people were involved, and the tag division was really a mixed bag in this era. Mm-hmm. But these two are really good. So if you're going to have two high flyers, have people in there that can have chemistry with them. And I think that these two guys would have chemistry with them.
I agree with you. It would be a barn burner. I think making a tornado tag allows all 4 teams all 4 men on the 2 teams, I should say, just do a lot of, I could see a lot of crazy spots, a lot of, everyone flying out of the ring, everyone jumping in the ring, action going inside, action going outside, super fast-paced match. I could see it being relatively short, like under 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But the fact that they go so fast, it would work in so much stuff. Like there would be so many spots.
Absolutely.
Considering how fast these guys could go. And if you're going to book something like this, I like your idea of it, because not only, like you said, do you get a feud between Helms and in London and or Kendrick, but also Noble, because Helms would blame Noble for the loss. So there's a lot that you can. So while you're saying, oh, we're just doing this, you do have ideas coming out of it. So you have potential storylines coming out of it. So yeah, that would be definitely a really awesome high spot filled match.
And I should add, before you get to your next match, Leonard, how many matches do you have total?
I only have 7.
Okay, so this is another way we're different. So I have 9 main matches, excluding the 2 that I already mentioned. So so you go ahead.
I'll probably finish up early, and that's fine. So because my next is actually, it's not a match, it's a segment.
I'm glad that you did this, because I thought about doing this, and I kind of did in a weird twisted way, but didn't. But go ahead.
Okay, so my segment, and the segment leads to a match, is a bikini contest hosted by Paul Heyman between Trinity, Ariel, and Kelly Kelly. So WWE, as I mentioned in the intro, was starting to move away from more of the TNA stuff they were doing previously, but that more extreme stuff was going to ECW. Kelly was working an exhibitionist gimmick at the time. And in the mixed tag match on the show, Ariel wore the tiniest thong possible and then a bunch of moves to show her ass. And actually the crowd starts chanting for her butt. Ariel's ass is probably one of the most over things on the entire show, if you watch it. So, anyway, go ahead and do something titillating here. So, you want to use Paul Heyman because he was like the on-air commissioner type role. Let him host it so you can use him and someone out there who can sell anything, make anything work. And if you're doing an audience vote, then obviously Kelly is going to win as the face. The heel girls would then beat her up. And this draws out Mike Knox, who was Kelly's boyfriend, storylines at the time to save her, which draws out Kevin Thorne. And that leads to the actual match, which is Kevin Thorne with Ariel versus Mike Knox with Kelly Kelly. So not exciting for sure. Yes, I know. But they were feuding on television at the time. And this is still me trying to think logically on these shows, bringing in the storylines from television, using the stuff that ECW had at the time. So Ariel and Kelly would recover, be on the outside for their men. Kelly would do something to distract Knox, maybe try to strip. And that allows Thorne to roll him up with a handful of tights for the victory. So I wouldn't pull the trigger on the heel turn here that happened on the actual show when Knox walks out on Kelly. But I would set it up. I would have him mad at her, and then you can have the payoff. You can have the turn on your next episode of regular television or what have you. So again, the idea, the TV should be used to build to the pay-per-view, but you should do some things on the pay-per-view that builds back to your TV.
Oh, absolutely, I agree. I like the segment. The match, you take it or leave it, but hey, I would like watching the women. I thought about doing something similar to what you laid out, and I was like, well, I have all this other stuff going on, so I didn't go that way, but I like that you did.
Okay.
So
good.
My next match, I don't know how you're gonna feel about this one, Leonard, but I'm proud of it. So okay. It's a fatal 4-way, and it's the Undertaker versus Mr. Kennedy versus the Boogeyman versus a mystery opponent. It's a fatal 4-way casket match. So who's the mystery opponent? So Mr. Kennedy and the Undertaker were having a big feud at this time. They had a few different matches. I feel like this would be an interesting interlude to that feud, because we are literally in the middle of that feud at this event. So Mr. Kennedy tries to recruit the Boogeyman. And who is that? Is it Kevin Thorne? It might be Kevin Thorne. He has his Mordecai gear on.
Oh, okay.
So you have Undertaker, Mr. Kennedy, the Boogeyman, and Kevin Thorne in his Mordecai gear in a casket match. Of course, the Undertaker would go over, but it would be really interesting to see Mr. Kennedy try to recruit these other two guys to try and gang up on the Undertaker. It doesn't go the way he wants. You get to see Mordecai against the Undertaker, which initially was going to be a plan, but it didn't happen. At this point, Kevin Thorne is more of like a vampire character. But anyway, it would be cool. He didn't have to dye his hair back to white or anything. He could just come out in the Mordecai gear, and you would have the really, really inside fans get a kick out of that. So there you go.
Well, I think it's interesting that you've got three people who have what I would call like a creepy gimmick,
right?
And then Mr. Kennedy. But then, as you said,
I had thought about doing another like kind of cartoonish character in this, but I was like, I really can't do that because he's in a feud with Mr. Kennedy. Like, so if I have, so that's why I chose to go with the Mr. Kennedy route, because I forget who else I had in this, but it was somebody also. You know what? I was going to put Kane in it.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't, and I was like, well, no. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. You can be because of the feud, and I do like I could see vignettes of him trying to like recruit Boogeyman, like get Boogeyman on his side, and being like trying to pretend like he's cool with the worms, and he's cool with like him smashing the clock and all this weird stuff. So I think you get some comedy out of that. And yeah, the real insider having Thorne come out as Mordecai gear, but still announced. I assume he still announced as Kevin Thorne and treated as Kevin Thorne.
Sure, yeah, you could, you could treat it all the same, but you have him coming out. You could even have him come out with whatever,
the staff he had. Yeah. So yeah, I like that idea because as you said, it's a deep cut for the fans, and I think that would be a fun wink. And I think you can get a story in the match of Kennedy.
I can see your mind doing somersaults right now, trying to.
It is because I'm trying to picture the match in my head and how it would go. And Kennedy, trying to get those two guys on his side and trying to get like a trio, against Taker, basically make it a 3-on-1, and those guys turning on Kennedy. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot that could go on here. It's a sports entertainment match for sure.
Absolutely.
But I think it's a cool idea. I like it the more I think about it. So who goes? Do all three go in the casket, or does Taker just have to put one guy in the casket?
No, I would put Kevin Thorne in the casket.
Thorne would go in the casket.
Yeah, absolutely. Because then you continue the Mr. Kennedy feud, and he's unscathed for the most part. And put Kevin Thorne in there. Doesn't really matter what happens to him anyway.
Yeah, doesn't matter at all. So my next bout is a double tables match: Rob Van Dam versus Hardcore Holly. So this is what I said about paying off something that never had a payoff. So Holly went through a career resurgence in ECW, and that started with a match between RVD and Holly, where Holly suffered a severe back laceration after hitting a table, and he continued to work through the match. And that's one thing I do remember from this time. When I said I didn't remember everything, I do remember that match and that back laceration. This was a super big thing, and WWE never really capitalized on it. Because of that, Holly got some street cred with the ECW fans, and he wound up turning like sort of quasi face, even though Heyman was still kind of leaning on him a little bit. As mentioned, he got the Sabu spot in the Elimination Chamber, but there was never really, I don't think, a blow off between RVD and Holly.
Right.
So Holly's looking for revenge. And while it might make sense to put Holly over storyline wise, you're not jobbing out RVD to Hardcore Holly. So that's why I did the double table stipulation. Holly can get that cathartic revenge by putting RVD through one table. But then Van Dam would win after a hell of a match from Holly that would continue to make him strong for the brand. So I would have him get the first table, RVD the second. They fight over that third with Rob just barely getting Holly through it, and they're both kind of collapse at the end. Because I do think you can still get more mileage out of Holly on the ECW brand and with the cred that he got from working through that one match. And if you let them go out there and have a hell of a tables match, I think that helps put them both over.
Absolutely, that would be entertaining. And I do remember that back laceration. That was an incredible visual at the time. And Hardcore Holly's had a lot of crazy injuries in his career, but that have kind of added to his whole, outlook as being like a really tough guy. And yeah, I think that this would be a fun match. RVD, I don't think gets enough credit for like having chemistry with just about anybody, and I think that this would be a lot of fun. Absolutely. So my next match is for the women's championship. Now, you had Mickie James versus Lita at Survivor Series, and in reality, that was Lita's last match. She had gotten tired of the crowds and the way she was being treated, and that was the end. But you didn't really know that. So what I would have here is Mickie James versus Lita, hair versus career, and it would be for the women's title. Obviously, I would still have Lita lose. Mickie James was the female wrestler at this time. She was great in every way, and so I would just have this be the ultimate blow off. Have Lita end her career, and have her get a standing ovation. Whatever you want to do, try and make her look good in the crowd's eyes again, if that's possible. I realized there was a lot going on here at that time, but anyway, that's what I would do. If you're going to have the women on here, this is how I would do it.
I think Lita, you could get her to come back because it's just a week after Survivor Series, and you tell her, we wanted to honor you on your way out the door. Yes, we want you to put Mickie over, and I think Lita would be fine with that. But we're going to honor you. And I think if you let them go out there and have the match they could have, and I think people overrate Lita in the ring. I don't think she was that great, but I think she was serviceable. And Mickie James is great. And Mickie James could get a very good match out of Lita. So if you let them go out there, you give them time, you let them work, you let them have a hell of a match, you let Mickie squeak the win. I think you could see the crowd really get behind Lita and do a thank you, Lita chant and really send her off on a nice note. And I think that's a good thing to do. And I like the idea of it. I like the idea of Mickie putting her hair on the line because it makes you think that, she could lose. Actually, most people probably think Mickie would lose. Oh, Lita's not going to retire, but they can shave Mickey's head. They shave people's heads all the time. So I kind of like that idea because, again, even with the dirt sheets and everything, not everyone knew what was going on behind the scenes. So I think most people would probably be surprised by the Lita loss. And not only do you send Lita off nice, but you get Mickie over really big. Even though she was, top of the mountain, as you said, that's going to push her up even higher. So, you're getting everyone over.
Absolutely. So what do you got next, Leonard?
So next up, this is my super mega cheat, and it is a triple threat match. Eminem of John Morrison and Joey Mercury with Melina versus the Hardy Boys of Matt and Jeff versus the New Age Outlaws of Billy Gunn and Road Dogg. So the New Age Outlaws were in TNA at this time as the Voodoo Kin Mafia, which we talked about some in the Nikki Rock Spotlight video.
Yeah.
The Hardy Boys issued an open challenge for the pay-per-view, which Eminem accepted. However, on TNA television, VKM said that they were answering the challenge and that they were coming, but they didn't show up.
Right.
Of course they didn't show up. Since this was something floated, like this is a possible. This is my cheat. We said we could have one cheat.
Yeah.
So this is my cheat. So Eminem and the Hardys are in the ring. They're ready to go. The music hits. The NAO come out and say, hey, we said we were taking the challenge. We're here to take the challenge. And it becomes a triple threat. So if the New Age Outlaws are going to stay, I would have them win to reestablish themselves. If not, I would have the Hardys get the win over them to protect Eminem.
Right.
So I don't know what this would be. Whether it's the whether it's the New Age Outlaws, I'm trying to say NAO, whether it's the Outlaws walking out of their contract or doing a one-shot deal because the WWE isn't worried about TNA at all. We don't care. Because if you look back at the time, they let people go. They went to TNA, didn't bother them, it seemed. So I think this is certainly plausible and would get a big pop and would get a lot of people talking to have them show up. So I'm not sure what the execution is of having them come over, as I said, but it would be something tremendous. And if they do stay on TNA, I think would certainly give them a boost, but it wouldn't give them a prolonged boost. And if it is them coming back full time, as you said, the tag division was a little wonky at this portion. So bringing back the New Age Outlaws, I think, would certainly help to shore things up a bit, especially if you can enter them into a high profile feud right away with either the Hardys or possibly M&M.
This would be entertaining. And in reality, I think if this were to happen, I think that you would have the Hardys go over, but M&M would take the fall, so that TNA, VKM could go back to TNA and keep their head held high. TNA doesn't lose out on much because they didn't take the fall, but the Hardys won and the crowd gets a surprise. But this would be a lot of fun to watch. For sure. And yeah, I mean, just thinking about the reaction of like when the Hardys reunited at WrestleMania, to think about the New Age Outlaws coming out would have been really cool, for sure. So my next match is an ECW rules battle royal. I have Kane, Test, Snitsky, Sabu, Sandman, Finley, Hardcore Holly, Mark Henry, Finley, and MVP in an ECW rules battle royal. So obviously you got to go over the top rope, but it's ECW rules. So everybody has weapons and it's just insane and chaotic. And I would have Kane go over.
Did you say Finley twice?
Did I? Yeah, I did.
I thought you said Finley twice.
Yeah,
so he gets eliminated and he comes back.
Yeah. I did say Finley twice. So you know what? To round out my 10, I would just have Tommy Dreamer there
you go. Makes sense. Again, the one thing you may have something else later, but again, like I talked about, having something ECWE, and you do. So I like the idea of a weapons battle royal. I think they've done those in the past. Having Kane win, of course, makes the most sense considering he's your biggest guy, he's your biggest star, and he's the guy that is known for throwing out the most people in the Royal Rumble and usually does well in battle royals. So yeah, I think you've got the right amount. You got the right guys in there: the Brawlers, the Bruisers, the original ECW guys. I don't see this being a very long match. I could see it being just high octane, quick eliminations, and just something to get a lot of guys on the show.
You could have some stuff going on the outside, like maybe some people go through the middle ropes or the bottom ropes, and there's a lot of weapon usage, but at the end of the day, you would have Kane maybe go over MVP or Mark Henry last the longest. But yeah.
Okay.
So what do you got next?
So next, this is the only match that we might have in common. I could see you doing this because it's the only time where I'm importing a WWE talent. And it is, so I won't say who it is to start with. I'll give you my lead up. So leading up to the show, I would have CM Punk complain about how he's not booked on the show. We mentioned how there's only 2 matches announced. I would have more matches be announced as we lead into it, even through Survivor Series. So by the time we get here, everything's announced. So every week, CM Punk waits to hear his name, Paul Heyman's announcing stuff and he's not getting booked and he thinks he's being held down. So, and there is some truth to that because as we talked about, Heyman was big on Punk, the McMahons weren't. So he wanted to use him. They didn't. So he's not getting booked on the show. So on the go home show, right before, the event, I have Punk going into the ring and saying he won't leave until he's given a match at December to Dismember. Heyman comes out and says, "Hey, I was looking out for you all along. I pulled some strings and I went outside of ECW. I went into WWE and I'm bringing in for you, CM Punk, the best possible opponent for you to have the best match possible on the show. And you are going to face Shawn Michaels." So CM Punk versus Shawn Michaels. To my knowledge, this never happened. I looked it up. I couldn't find it. Shawn could still go at this time. This was part of his comeback era. I think this would be an amazing match. And fingers crossed, Shawn would be willing to put Punk over. Because while I said I don't think you need to have Punk eliminate like 8 dudes with the Anaconda device, putting him over Shawn Michaels would be great for him in his career. And at the same time, ECW was like its own little pocket over here, to the right. So even a loss by Shawn, Shawn Michaels can absorb any loss at this point, especially. But the fact that it's like to an ECW dude on an ECW pay-per-view, more or less, isn't going to factor into any storylines. So this is basically me putting on the best match I thought I could figure out.
Right.
And using it to hopefully strap a rocket to Punk's ass in a different way than what Heyman wanted to do.
I like that. My gosh, I mean, that's like certainly a low-key dream match there, and it would have been great to see that actually happen. It's always more frustrating when it could have happened because they were both around at the same time.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that would have been great. I would be shocked if Michaels did the job in this case. If it were WWE, I could certainly see them having Michaels go over, but
he probably would. But again, fancy booking, fingers crossed, I would want Punk to win.
Absolutely. Well, no, yeah, that would be great for sure. So my next match, and I did something similar to what you said. You had a segment that turned into a match. So that's what I have going on here. Yeah. So you have Rated RKO coming out to do a promo. They had stuff going on with DX at this time. So you have them coming out, cutting a promo. Maybe it's about DX or just how great they are, whatever you want to do. And you have Heyman or whoever come out and, announce that they're going to have a match, or maybe you have Rated RKO say, we're willing to take on anybody. We're a great tag team. But who do you have come out? You have the reuniting world's greatest tag team, Charlie Haas and Shelton Benjamin, come out. Now, this happened a week after this event.
Oh.
So Haas came out with Benjamin, and I think celebrated a victory Benjamin had, like on Raw the next night after this event. And then a week after that, they did actually reunite. Now, they had a feud, but really didn't do a ton. What better way to kickstart them again? Have them come out, reuniting as the world's greatest tag team, face Rated RKO. And you know what? I would have them go over with maybe some DX interference, maybe Triple H interference, whatever you want to say. I would have the world's greatest tag team go over, and nobody's losing out on this because these are all four great guys, especially at the time. So,
versus Rated RKO versus the world's greatest tag team.
Yeah,
that's a great match. Did you say who you would put over?
Yeah. We talked all about this. You were on another planet, I think, at this time.
I was.
I would have the world's greatest tag team go over via interference from DX somehow.
Via DX, okay.
Maybe it's just Triple H. We'll get more on that later. But right. I would have some sort of interference by DX to cause Rated RKO to lose.
Okay. I'm back on this planet with you now. All right. I like the idea. World's greatest tag team were, of course, a great tag team. And getting them back together, especially since that's a real thing that happened, was great. I like Rated RKO. I think that Orton and Edge worked well together.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're incorporating DX to kind of do, have Rated RKO versus DX be something while putting over the world's greatest tag team, again, same thing I try to do in my booking, you do in yours, is where even in a loss, you're not so much protecting someone like WWE does a lot, but you're putting everybody over. Like right. Everybody's getting something that makes them look good to a degree, or at least doesn't make them look bad.
Right.
So good stuff. Once I figured it out. Okay, so we're up to my main event. And it is, and you're not going to like it, it is a Hell in a Cell weapon of choice match for the ECW World Heavyweight title, featuring Big Show, who was the champion at the time, with a barbed wire baseball bat versus Bobby Lashley with a steel chair. So as I said, I didn't want to do an Elimination Chamber because I wanted to break those guys out, but you still need a big spectacle for the main event. So I went with a Hell in a Cell, which is kind of the next step down, I would say, from an Elimination Chamber. Lashley versus Big Show, and moving the title to Lashley was what was going on in ECW at the time anyway. So this makes sense to make them the main event, even though on paper this might look like a lackluster main event. both these guys were good to great at different times. Lashley may have his best period going on right now. So this wasn't necessarily peak for either guy, but both these guys can work. And I think this is a brawler / power wrestler type of bout. And the fact that you have this in a Hell in a Cell and you're giving them weapons, I think that plays into the strengths of probably both these guys at this time.
Yeah.
And in the actual Elimination Chamber match, there was this duel between Lashley and Show where the Show's using the bat like as a club or sword, and Lashley's using the chair to block. And that's one of the more memorable images from the show. So you could still have that spot. You can still have that moment. And other spots where they're using the cage against each other. And of course, since Lashley did win this or win the main event and win the title originally, and Show was leaving shortly after this, I think he wound up to put Lashley over on TV on the next TV show and then left. I would, of course, have Lashley win. Now, I assume that you're putting the title on somebody else, even if the ECW belt plays into your show. But as I said, I wanted to keep it more ECW focused, and that's where I wound up where I'm at.
No, that would have been a great tough guy match for sure. Show could still go at this time, and Bobby Lashley was great. So yeah, I mean that would be a great Hell in a Cell match for sure. And it keeps with the ECW theme, and I think it would have been a good main event to still kind of accomplish what they wanted to accomplish anyway. So at this point, I have 3 more matches to go.
Oh, I didn't count my stuff, and I should have, because I didn't realize that I only had 7. Well, it would be it would be 9 if you count the segment in the dark match. I guess I had 9.
Right, and looking at my pay-per-view is definitely above 3 hours. But anyway.
Well, anyway, keep going. Let's hear the last 3. And
so my number 7 match. Initially, in the original pay-per-view, you had Balls Mahoney versus Matt Striker. Mm-hmm. Here, I would have Matt Striker versus Rey Mysterio. It's a 2 out of 3 falls match. Now, here's what I do. So the original match had Striker's rules. So the first fall is Striker's rules, which, in case anybody didn't know, it was a strict adherence to the rules of wrestling with the eye counting and all that stuff. It was like a strict adherence to those rules. So that's the first fall. The second fall, Lucha Libre rules. So you would have a count to 20 if you're on the outside. If somebody tries to take off the mask, it's a disqualification. You can win via knockout. So there's some slight differences to Lucha Libre rules, but they are very close to standard American wrestling rules.
I would have, now I know what you do, but I'm cutting real quick. I would have Striker lose this fall via trying to take the mask off because he doesn't know any better.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly what I had in mind. And the third fall would be no DQ. So Striker lost the match against Balls Mahoney. I would certainly have him lose to Rey Mysterio here.
Right.
But you have different rules, and then you have the DQ at the end, the no DQ at the end, I should say. So you have 3 different distinct falls. And, Matt Striker obviously was on his way to being a commentator.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, now I would assume you're going to do some lead-in stuff. So basically, the feud that Striker had with Balls Mahoney would just be transferred to Rey.
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
In a way, I like the idea of the fact that you're incorporating the Striker's rules and what Striker's gimmick and concept and idea was. But since you got him going against Rey, and Rey brings in that Lucha Libre element. He was always the Mexican wrestler guy, even though he really wasn't.
Right.
They hung that on him. So having the Lucha Libre rules, and I think you would definitely need the commentators to explain those rules and get them over.
Yeah.
And I think in the first fall, which is similar to the Balls Mahoney match, is you would have, I think, Striker calling Rey out and every little thing to the ref, but cheating behind his back.
This could be a really short match. Also.
It could be.
You could have it could be stupid if you really want it to be. It could be like Rey getting disqualified in the first fall, Striker getting disqualified in
Right.
second, and then you have no DQ.
That's probably, you know what, that's probably the smart way to book it. So you would do a couple minutes and have Ray do something stupid like punch Striker in the face
Yeah,
or
yeah,
throw him over the top rope or something like that. And then you come back and you have Striker, try to take the mask off. So less than 5 minutes, you've got 2 DQ falls. And then you get the no DQ match. And you let that go a little bit.
right.
And, and this would be, I think, a carried job by Ray, nothing against Striker. But I think Ray's going to be putting in all the heavy work to get the match over. And definitely he should win. So it's a cool concept. I never really thought to do something like that. But I like how you did actually use the Striker rules from the pay-per-view that you incorporated.
Right. Well, my number 8 match is John Cena versus Umaga for the WWE Championship. So at the last event, Survivor Series, you had King Booker, the World Championship, being taking place on that pay-per-view. It would be a little bit until John Cena and Umaga would have their first match. I would kick it off here, and since this is not my main event, the likely way to go is you would have Cena lose by DQ, say.
Mm-hmm.
You still have Umaga maintain his undefeated streak. He's not been pinned. He's not been submitted. We know that Cena would be the first to do that. And one of my biggest issues with how WWE books some of these monster guys is they have this undefeated streak, and as soon as that's done, then they go down, down, down the card. And so I would have Umaga go over here. Initially, you could also have Umaga win the title if you really wanted to, and have Cena win it back. But if you wanted to be more logical, I would have Cena lose by DQ. That keeps the feud going, and then you can have Cena end Umaga's undefeated streak. So
the other thing I would maybe do is have a double count out, have them just brawl to the back.
Right. Yeah, you could. I thought about that as well too. I just think that title needed to be a big, like, that title needed to be defended here. There needed to be some more titles.
And again, if you wanted this random odd pay-per-view, as it were, have people talking about it, having a hotshot title change, even if Umaga loses it back the next day on Raw,
right,
would certainly give something to people talking, because no one would have expected that. No one would have guessed that at
right.
all. And again, it's a way to get Umaga over while not really hurting Cena, especially if he's winning it back the next night. But yeah, I think the smart way here would be to have a DQ or count out ending, just to kind of start the feud between the two of them and let that play, through the Rumble. And again, my difference here is I would probably go with the double count out. The DQ for Cena's fine, but I like the idea that if it's a brawl to the back, then it leaves it completely unfinished between them, maybe more unfinished than even a DQ.
Right.
So it's both guys wanting that rematch.
Yeah, no, I like that as well. So my last match, as I renamed my pay-per-view, Elimination Chamber.
Yeah.
Logically, the last match is an Elimination Chamber match.
You know what? You should have opened with the Elimination Chamber.
See, it's funny you mentioned that. So
okay.
Initially, I did that. I went back and forth with this card a few times, in that I was going to have John Cena and Umaga end the night. But then I thought to myself, I really don't want to keep the December to Dismember name, but how do I do that? Like, it can't be Survivor Series. It can't be No Way Out. It can't be, obviously, New Year's Revolution. So, like, what do I do? All these pay-per-view names are taken, so it
could be Seasons Beatings.
yeah,
that was an ECW pay-per-view.
That's true. So I went back and forth on this. I was going to have it open, but I was like, well, if I still want to make the ECW brand a highlight, I'll have it end the night and have that be the main event. So I still have the Elimination Chamber match for the ECW Championship. My lineup is a little bit different, though. So obviously Big Show is defending the title. It's Big Show versus CM Punk versus RVD versus Bobby Lashley versus Mick Foley versus Shawn Michaels. So here's my logic.
First of all, I would like to say my initial idea was CM Punk versus Mick Foley. And I looked all over the place and I couldn't find where Foley was around.
Right.
And since I was already using my mega cheat to bring in the New Age Outlaws, I didn't use Foley. I used Michaels. So I just wanted to mention that. You can
No,
explain.
yeah. So like he was around, but he was obviously not doing consistent matches. He would do stuff here and there, but he was not doing anything consistent. He was obviously past his prime here. But my logic in having Mick Foley and Shawn Michaels in this match is they want to be included in this match because this is a title that they never won. So you have Shawn Michaels as, this guy who's, the Triple Crown and all this stuff. He's won all these titles, but he hasn't won the ECW championship. And Mick Foley as well, when he even had a stint in the original ECW, and he didn't win the ECW title as well. So you have these two guys who want to put themselves in the mix because it's a title they've never held. I would still have Bobby Lashley go over here. So I would have Bobby Lashley go over. I might have it come down to Bobby Lashley and CM Punk, something to that effect. But I would have Mick Foley and Shawn Michaels look good in the process. I would have Mick Foley get over somebody like a CM Punk or an RVD. I would have Shawn Michaels, have a good showing. But I would have Bobby Lashley win because that was the ultimate goal. And as it was coming down the pike, you would have Bobby Lashley and Umaga and the whole McMahon Trump situation was coming down the pike. So that would be how I ended my pay-per-view. You have Bobby Lashley standing tall. You get over the ECW brand by having these two legends wanting to be a part of this brand. If we want to get the brand over, let's not make it look like the redheaded stepchild that nobody wants to be a part of. Let's have it be something that people want to be a part of. Let's give it some sense of prestige if you can, and have that be the main event. Have Mick Foley and Shawn Michaels there. Shawn Michaels won an Elimination Chamber match. To the best of my knowledge, Foley was never in one. So yeah.
So while you're talking, I looked up the Grand Slam, and Shawn Michaels, I don't know what you would call it. He's actually has 6 titles to his name.
Right.
He won the WWF WWE title, the World Heavyweight title, the World Tag Team titles, the Raw Tag Team titles, the Intercontinental title, and the European title. And actually, Jericho doesn't one better. He won the Hardcore belt. So Jericho has had 7 titles in WWE.
Well, when Shawn Michaels was in his prime, like they made a really big deal about him being this Triple Crown winner.
Right.
When he won the European title, which is probably one of the main reasons they gave him that, so that he could have that accolade too.
Yeah, I think that was the Grand Slam. I think the European title gave him the Grand Slam because he was already telling themselves the Triple Crown. I like that you kept the Elimination Chamber and you kept a lot of the original guys. You bumped up RVD, which makes total sense, and you brought in 2 individuals that would make sense to use in Mick Foley and Shawn Michaels. So, and those would be great guys to have involved here. And I think it's a shot in the arm that does boost ECW, like you said, we're closing the ECW title. And the fact that you're bringing in Foley and Michaels with them both saying, hey, I want to win this belt because I've never had it. That elevates the title. That makes the title look good. That makes everybody in the match look good. Now, I don't know if you said, is this still with the weapons?
Oh, I meant to touch on that. I guess it could be if you really. I thought about that as we were talking, and I was like, well, what would Shawn Michaels' weapon be? God, maybe God. I don't know.
He's like shooting like Hadoukens, but it's like the force of God coming out of his hand.
Foley could have the barbed wire bat. So yeah, you could have still be this an extreme Elimination Chamber match.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a weapon that maybe Hunter could loan him the sledgehammer.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because they were friendly.
It could be a backstage segment where Shawn's like, I don't know what weapon I want to use. I don't know what I'm going to do. And Hunter just shows up and just very silently, like holds the hammer, hands it off to him. I think that's cool. I think
Absolutely.
That's a cool idea. So I would do that. But no, that would be a hell of a main event and a hell of a closer. And again, even though you didn't focus on ECW like I did, you may wind up getting ECW over more as a brand than I did with that main event and the focus that you're putting on the belt by such top level talent.
And that's what I mean. Like, you did a great job of, kind of honoring the vintage ECW stuff and the ECW stars while also pushing what the ECW brand was at the time. So I think we both had cards. We both had different trajectories. I'm a little worried about how long my pay-per-view would be. But
I think I would have to go back and review all the matches. I think you would have to have a couple really short matches.
Yeah, the 2 out of 3 falls with Stryker and Mysterio would have to be really short, as we discussed.
Yeah. I think you would have to have a couple under 10 minutes to get, because that Elimination Chamber is going to be what, like at least, aren't they like at least a half hour?
At least half hour, 45 minutes, depending.
Yeah, depending on how quick you let the guys out and such. So yeah, I mean, so you've got a long show and I've got like a short show. I mean, I've almost gotten in your house.
Which makes sense. A shorter show makes sense in a way, because this is, as we've talked about, this was an extra pay-per-view in between, 2 main ones. So yeah.
So regardless of closing, I think we both probably booked something a lot better than what Vince and Stephanie came up with. Because maybe it's because we understand what ECW was. Maybe it was because, like you said, well, I'm just going to put on the best show I think I can put on with all the talent I've got available. Or like me having the idea, well, how can I marry the two concepts of what it was and what it is? But yeah, this just comes down to, I think, a show where it was booked by people who necessarily didn't understand what ECW was, and the fact that the creative and the writing was extremely messy during this period, at least in my opinion, and that was primarily on the head of Stephanie McMahon.
Yeah, and you have, obviously, Heyman understands what ECW needs to be, but he's obviously was too outspoken and too in your face and maybe too relentless about what he wanted and what it should be, and it was just kind of a recipe for disaster. So it's unfortunate that the pay-per-view is not very good, but we had fun redoing it, and I'm sure we will get to another rebook at some point. Leonard and I will have to discuss what that might be, but we'll get to it. Maybe WrestleMania 9. We talked about that one.
We talked about that one. You know what? Heroes of Wrestling.
Heroes of Wrestling. There you go.
That's the worst. That's considered one of the worst pay-per-views of all time. I don't think you can make that good.
Well, challenge accepted.
Yeah, that might be the next one. If you use the talent available, I don't think that you can make that good.
All right. Well, stay tuned. And for Leonard, my name is Chad. Please check out our show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Give us a 5-star review if you think we earned it, and we will see you next week.